Hello mate, welcome back to the channel. We are at number 18 of 36 in Project 36. A very exciting halfway milestone today that we're going to be reaching with the Slayer. This is the first of the Duelist Ascendancies that we have created in the series. And I wanted to bring the Slayer back and get it kicked off with that because for me personally, it's the most iconic Duelist Ascendancy from PoE 1. I think it's right at home and it deserves a spot in PoE 2. Now, obviously the Gladiator is very dear to people's hearts as well, and I will be bringing the Gladiator back, so a bit of a spoiler for that one, but we're going to be doing it in a bit of a different way, especially with the rework that we've had in PoE 1 recently. It's going to be interesting to see what you think. But for today, let's have a look at how we've reimagined the Slayer Ascendancy for PoE 2. Right, here we are at the presentation screen. You can see a bit of the artwork, you can see the rough layout of the tree. But as always with these, we're going to start off by reading a bit of a description, get into the theme and get into the mood. Look for the largest enemy on the field. In their shadow, you will find him. Blink, and in short order, it will be the Slayer's boot atop the Goliath's neck. Gold means nothing to him. His motive is simple: to become legend. You! Calls the Slayer, pointing across the battlefield. His ire is unrivaled, and there is nowhere to run that he will not find you. Bit of a Taken Liam Neeson style description there.
I will find you, and I will kill you.
And then the themes that we've got for the Slayer are Leech, obviously most important that we bring back the Leech node. Overleech is iconic for the Slayer. Dueling, execution, and critical strikes. Alright, let's get into the nodes, and we're going to be bringing back quite a few of the iconic sort of nodes that we saw in PoE 1 that I think just work, and they'll work very well in PoE 2. We've got some adjustments, but we're definitely keeping similar themes here, and then adding in some whole entirely new wacky stuff as well. So we'll start off with something very familiar. We've got 15% increased armor and evasion, and then we've got 50% increased charge duration. You probably know where I'm going with this, and that is Masterful form, perfectly balanced. Your maximum endurance charges is equal to your maximum frenzy charges. You gain 1 to maximum frenzy charges. And then I've added this additional line here where gaining an endurance charge or frenzy charge has a 25% chance to grant the other also. So you've essentially got a 25% chance, quarter of a chance every time you gain a charge to also gain the opposite type of charge. Just a nice little quality of life thing. We know that you're going to be spending charges a lot more, so I felt like this added sort of small amount of generation would be really useful. Alright, now let's move over to another sort of quite familiar node. We've got 25% crit chance and 15% crit multi. And then we've got two options here. So this is the only duo node on the tree. And we've got Goliath Carver and Goliath Strike. So this is essentially two different ways of getting that kind of base crit or guaranteed crit from the Slayer Ascendancy. So Goliath Carver is the most familiar. Your weapon's critical strike chance is 10%. So this doesn't matter what crit chance you've got on any of your weapons, it's going to become 10%. It was a little bit lower in PoE 1, but we know they've inflated the base crit chances on a lot of the weapons in PoE 2, and myself and some people are suspecting that our availability to increase crit chance might be slightly lower to compensate. So you've got that line at the top, then whilst in the presence of a unique enemy, gain plus 5% critical strike chance. You've got plus 10% to critical strike multiplier per nearby enemy up to 100%. We also have this line at the bottom here, nearby enemies have 50% less critical strike multiplier. So essentially halving their crit multi. Alright. On the other side, we've got Goliath Strike. So this is if you wanted to go a slightly different way about it and guarantee yourself crits, but just less frequently. So every 4 seconds, you are guaranteed a critical strike. If you would have dealt a critical strike anyway, this attack has 100% more crit multi. And then we get that same line at the bottom, nearby enemies have 50% less critical strike. So what I wanted to try and achieve with these two was to give you a different way of scaling your crit and fishing for crits, and just to offer, you know, essentially like different builds, different options, whether that's to do with unique weapons or just how you want to get access to that crit. There could be something that massively reduces your critical chance, and then having a guaranteed crit every 4 seconds will become then very valuable, for example. All right, let's move down and we'll go to like essentially what is the only tier 2 node eventually on the bottom there, but we've got 2 different routes to get there. So on the left, we've got some attack speed and damage, and then we've got exhausting assault. With this, I wanted to have basically the opposite of like a bloodlust rampage style effect where you're strongest when you first encounter the enemy and you set your sights on them. For every 10% of maximum life the healthiest rare or unique enemy has in your presence, you gain plus 4% increased area of effect, 3% attack speed, 2 movement speed, and 1 more damage. What I mean there, obviously by healthiest, is say you've got 3 rares on the screen. Whichever has the highest life count, you're going to get the maximum benefit from that highest life count. It will default to that. Which is, I think, an interesting thing because it means that if you are up against, say, a twinned unique boss or 3 rare enemies or something, as long as you're not damaging one of them, you can you're incentivized to focus on one of them at a time. And then we've got this very cool sort of like recuperation element on the bottom here where you regenerate 10% of life per second for 10 seconds after killing a rare or unique. So this is basically saying, right, you're going to be really powerful at first. You're essentially going to get more and more tired as you're whittling down the enemy and you're going to be losing, you know, the majority of the buff. But once you finally finish the fight, you're exhausted, you've taken on this rare, this Goliath, then you're getting a bit of recoup, respite, and you're regenerating. Kind of quite a thematic idea there. On the other side, you can grab some attack speed and damage, and then you've got Endless Fervour, and this is our leech node. So what I've done here is condense the 2 leech nodes from PoE 1 kind of into a single leech node. So life leech effects are not removed when unreserved life is filled. This is overleech. And then we've also got 20% of your overkill damage is leached as life. And then on the bottom there, we've got just some nice quality of life stuff. 10% reduced damage while leaking. And you are unaffected by bleeding while leeching. Cool thing about this is that you're unaffected by bleeding, but it doesn't mean you can't have bleeding on you. It just doesn't do anything. And so there is an opportunity for like a self-bleed build, or maybe there's some items there that could be useful with this node. All right, so you've taken either one of those or perhaps both of them, and then what do you get on the tier 2? Uprising. So this was stolen from PoE 1, and this was a node that, you know, went up to 100% on the Gladiator in PoE 1, but it felt very, very powerful, and I don't know why, I just like couldn't imagine having 100% more damage on a node. It felt like it would just be like always a kind of best pick and a mandatory pick. So I thought, right, put it on a T2 and then have it only go up to 50%. This is essentially 50% more damage in most bossing situations because we know we're going to be taking a lot longer fighting rares and bosses, most likely, or that's the intention at least. So yeah, very, very damage heavy kind of bottom section here, which is cool. And also like quite generic, like you can do a lot of different things with these. Right, now let's go around clockwise, and probably one of my favorite nodes, a very new node here. So we've got attack speed and damage again, and then we've got Skull Collector. Wear the skulls of unique enemies you kill on your back as a trophy. Enemies in your presence are intimidated with 2% increased effect per monster level of the skull. In the presence of a unique enemy, the skull grants you a random monster mod. Okay, so what's going on here? The idea is that this is a passive effect. You don't have to do anything to activate this necessarily, but every time you kill a unique enemy, you're going to get like a little miniaturized version of their skull on your back. And whilst you have that skull on your back, and essentially you will always have a skull on your back after killing your first enemy, and once you've taken this node, depending on the monster level, so say you're at level, you know, monster level 70, then you're going to get 140% increased effect of Intimidate. So intimidated enemies have 10% increased damage taken. And so what this would do with a level 70 monster, it would give you 240% effectiveness of that, which means you would get 24% increased damage taken. Very, very powerful, but it's something that scales with you, and you want to be pushing those higher and higher level, eventually getting to, you know, pinnacle bosses, Ubers, and getting those highest possible level monster mods that you can get. Also, a nice little effect is when you're in the presence of a unique enemy, whilst you have a skull on your back, you're going to get a random monster mod. Now, this could be, it's going to be seeded based on the monster so that you can't just keep respawning the zone or anything. That's the idea. But yeah, you're going to just get like a random interesting buff, which is going to change up the fight a little bit. And it's kind of about like stealing power a little bit from these like skulls, you know, and like from the enemy. One cool thing I wanted to note on this was, say you've got a skull that you've taken off of like the Devourer, let's just say as an example, and you really like that skull, then I thought it would be cool if like maybe in the skill UI or the MTX window that you would be able to essentially lock that skin, and then anytime you get a new monster mod of a higher level, you know, a new monster skull, it would just keep the appearance of that, and then you could unlock it at any time and go back to your unskinned version if you wanted. So yeah, fun idea. Really like this idea of like, you know, the Slayer taking on these giant behemoths and then like taking their skulls as a trophy. All right. Then we've got attack speed and damage again, and we've got flawless execution. So culling, I think, is like, and this idea of executing is just a very, very cool effect for the Slayer. And I wanted to give a whole node to that. We know that culls are working very differently. So if you haven't heard yet, then currently the way that we've seen in the latest build that culling works is there's a different culling threshold based on the enemy type. So 30% for normal enemies, magic is 20, 10% for rares, and then 5% cull threshold for uniques. Now, this allows you to essentially double that if you're critting, and non-crits have a 50% increased cull threshold. So if you're critting fairly regularly, you're effectively getting a 100% increased cull range, which is super, super powerful and might be slightly broken, but we will see. Cool idea. Maybe the numbers need to change slightly. All right. 2 more nodes to go, and these are both essentially like brand new nodes. I wanted to like lean into this idea of the Slayer having like being a bit of a two-handed weapon master, and it's going to be very different to what the Gladiator offers and what we've designed for that around weapon mastery. So this is, you're getting some armor and evasion and increased damage specifically with two-handed weapons, and then you've got Imbalance. And Imbalance essentially allows you to, we've got this idea that parry skills are going to be in the game, and we know from shields you've got these timed active block skills, and we've also got timed skills like the arrow, you know, the big wind up arrow and different things like that, and perfect strike, where if you time them perfectly you get an additional effect. So this idea is that you have parries where if you time the parry, then you can trigger some kind of riposte or, you know, retort. And so I wanted to play into that idea, and essentially it allows you to use any parry skills with a two-handed weapon. That's a big mechanical change. Then every time you do that, you cause the enemy to get a stack of it imbalanced. And imbalance gives benefits like they have got 8% less attack speed, 20% increased parry window, and then they deal 4% less damage and take 4% increased damage. So very powerful, but the important thing here is those top two is I wanted to make it so that when you do parry an enemy, they become unbalanced, and then it's easier to parry them again because they're hitting slower and the window's extended. And so you can quite quickly sort of then like dominate the fight by sort of parrying them one after another and becoming this kind of like perfectly timed kind of fighter, which I thought was a really cool like skill-based mechanic idea. So that's Imbalance. And then the last node is you're getting 4% more damage to unique and rare enemies and 10% increased ailment duration. And we've got a Duel of Names. So this is very much about that dueling node idea. Enemies clear the path between you and the nearest rare and unique enemy. So what I imagined here mechanically is the idea that there's going to be a line drawn between you, and then monsters pathing essentially can't go within that line, anything other than that enemy. Maybe rares and uniques can like pass through it, but any normal or magic enemies can't. And this just I thought was like a really iconic idea that they're kind of all parting the way to make a line for you to then get to the enemy. It's one of the probably coolest mechanical nodes I think we've got on this class. And then we wanted to give some interesting sort of mechanical bonuses as well here. The nearest rare or unique enemy has 25% increased effects of all debuffs on them. Now, this number might be too high, and it doesn't sound very high, but I think this is incredibly powerful. And underneath that, we've got killing a rare or unique enemy increases the effect of buffs on you by 25% for 12 seconds. There's like this moment of like glory that you're kind of getting like increased buff effects for. But going back to this increased debuff effect, this includes, in my mind at least, ailments, curses, marks, auras, like negative aura effects like pride and war cries, and like banners, anything like that, any debuff that is on the enemy. And so you think that all stacks up to quite a huge like debuff across the board in of itself. I think this is a deceptively powerful node. It's really interesting with the line of sight stuff, then it's also like a pretty powerful statistic node as well. It might even need to become a tier 2 and rearrange the tree slightly. So as we like to do, I'm going to pick my favorite node, and it's a hard one, but I think for me, the most interesting, let's just go with what I think is the most interesting. Obviously, I really like this idea of, you know, you're dueling and you're creating this line of sight so you can get to the enemies quite quickly. It also stops a lot of like blocking and pushy elements. But Skull Collector, I think, is the thing for me. It's so thematic, this idea of actually wearing the skull of the unique enemies that you kill on your back is just very, very cool. So, yeah, that's going to be the one for me. Let me know which of the nodes you found most interesting. And like I say, we're going to be recording and getting one of these out every single day, all the way up until early access. So, yeah, it's gonna be a wild ride. Really enjoying it. We actually had Ghazzy today jumped on, and someone had let him know that we'd created a Warlock class. So if you haven't seen the Warlock, I'll put a link up here. But yeah, he jumped on and he was taking a look at that, and I managed to catch it live on stream because someone atted me. And it was awesome. He was very complimentary, really enjoyed it, and he was very complimentary about the sort of project and stuff in general. So I just wanted to send some love to him for, you know, shouting out the channel. I massively appreciate it. And it was just cool to see, you know, someone who originally, when someone said, "Oh, Ghazzy's watching your Warlock video," I was like, "Oh no, he's gonna pull it apart," right? He's like the minion lord, and so I thought, God, he's gonna see through so many issues, but he, besides like balance things, obviously we always say in this project, there's a lot of balance issues and a lot of this stuff because we just don't know where the balance is going to be at. But in terms of conceptually, you seem to really enjoy it. So that was very cool. So yeah, please do, you know, share these videos to anyone that you think would like them. It helps me out massively. Obviously, we're doing a big push for the channel in the build up to early access. So yeah, plenty more to come, and I hope you're excited for it. All right, that's going to do it for this one. Friends, exiles, I will see you in the next one. Ta-da.